Hello, Youth at Fellowship. What's up, guys? And a very, 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 very Merry Christmas to you. Well, guys, we did it. It's December. We survived 2020, and that just happened. Like, that was weird, right? And let's just take a moment and think about what we've been through this year. We went from wildfires in Australia, remember those? We had Kobe Bryant going into a global pandemic, and we saw issues of social injustice and crisis around the world. We had a lockdown where we spent hours of our time on screens, and maybe for some of you watching this, you've moved to university or you're trying to move to university in a time that the future feels very uncertain or very unclear. And last but not least, we lost a legend recently, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm going to try. Ballet Cosmico. And Matthias, you can tell me how I did with my Spanish. But that is Diego Maradona, the legend of football himself. So it wouldn't be weird to come to the end of this year feeling a little weary and beaten down. I'm not here to drag us down, but I just want to acknowledge that was a hard year. But in amongst this, we saw hope. We saw our friends and family connecting online. We got to continue with youth group online. And slowly but surely, we started to see things open back up again. We saw people that we hadn't seen in months. School started to open up back up again. Not sure if that's a good thing. And we found that in the darkest times of this year, hope was still very much there. And as we prepare for Christmas in 2020, we know that that hope is very much alive, and we're going to see why. Here's a little about where we're going today. We're going to look at 2 reasons that we have for hope, and we're going to look at what we do with that hope. But first, let's have a little look at a time when a very hopeful promise was made to people who really needed it. So once upon a time before COVID-19, many moons ago, a guy called Isaiah, a prophet, meaning he spoke on God's behalf, he's writing a message of hope to a people who are in desperate need of hope. Let me set the scene. It's around 730 BC, which means it's around 730 years before Jesus was born. And God's people, the Jews, they've been saved out of Egypt. They've been in their promised land. They're chilling, and they've forgotten completely about the God who saved them. Okay? They're worshiping other gods. They're doing all these wicked things, and they're just in a really bad place. They've completely turned away from God, and God has had about enough at this point, and through Isaiah, he delivers a message of serious judgment. He literally tells the people that they're going to be shattered and broken by an upcoming invasion on their land. Now that doesn't sound so good, but it's in this message of judgment that God delivers a message of hope. So let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 9, and we'll pick it up in verse 6. And it says, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Now, to you and I, it might be easy to read this and be like, well, duh, it's about Jesus, obviously. But remember, this is written over 700 years before Jesus was born. So let's take a little look at what that means and why this specifically is a message for hope. So we have 2 reasons. One, that a son will be given, and one, that the son who will be given will be king. In other words, the reasons for hope are Jesus is the son and Jesus is the king. So our first reason for hope is that Jesus is the son, and as we read, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given." This is actually a sign that God would give his people, and we see this a couple chapters earlier in Isaiah chapter 7. When Isaiah writes, as God speaking, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. What is so amazing about this is that God is the one who gives a sign. So remember, these people are in the deepest, darkest depths of their disobedience, and they've totally turned away from God, but God is still the one who moves towards them in this act of great love. He is the one who gives them a sign. And this becomes even more incredible when we see the reason why God will give this sign, and why ultimately God gives his son. Matthew tells us this as God speaks to Joseph about that same sign. Now remember, this is 700 years later, just before Jesus is born. And God says, she, Mary, will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. You see, not only did God act first in this great love, but we see the reason why when it writes, you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So God sent his one and only son, Jesus, and Jesus, being both fully man and fully God, was sent to save the world from their sin. Now, sin, if you're scared of that word, it literally just means this innate desire to rebel, to turn away from God, to do things our own way, to be the masters of our own lives, instead of live in relationship with our loving Father and Creator. So Jesus, fully man, he came as a child, and fully God, Emmanuel, God with us. He came for that reason, to save us. And you see, going back to Isaiah, in all their failings, God's people, the people Isaiah is writing to, they've run away from God. They've turned away from him. They've given into their sin. And the reality is that they deserve to die under God's punishment. But even in all this, God loves him so much that he makes this amazing promise that a child will be born, that a son will be given, and he will be the one to save the people. And this is exactly what God has done for you and me through Jesus. For us, we live on the other side of that promise, and we know that Jesus is the Son. We know that God has been faithful, incredibly faithful, to fulfill that promise. So, unlike the people of Israel, we might not be bowing down to gold idols or anything like that, but this year we have seen how the things that we put our hope in have crumbled before our eyes. Maybe it's our comfort, our security, our desire to control things. I mean, shout out for all my type A's who like to plan. I see you, I feel you. Or maybe it's our desire for approval. I think in the midst of a global pandemic, we've seen just how fragile these things are. So let me ask you a question. What do you put your hope in? Is it in having the best grades so you can have your identity and academic success? Is it in having people like you so that you fit in? I mean, I've been there. That's so real. Sometimes still am there. And it could be, maybe you find your hope in knowing what the next 5 years of your life is going to look like as you plan for college. So what are you putting your hope in? And as you're putting your hope in these things, do you think that's a solid place? Do you think that's a place that's going to last? If you know me, you'll know that I love my nephews. I talk about them way too much. And what brought me so much joy recently is when my 5-year-old nephew and my godson, he wrote his letter to Santa about what he's hoping for this Christmas. Now, no surprises, he's hoping for toys. But to be fair, he did send a very personal message to Santa to ask him how he's doing first. So he writes, "Dear Santa, Merry Christmas. How are you?" "I've been very good. How are the elves? What is your favorite toy?" I am hoping for toys. Well, all I can say is I hope Santa wrote back, because I think he's waiting for him to keep in touch. So among these toys, he's hoping for an Xbox. There's no surprise there. He's hoping for a football kid. He's probably has a pretty good shot of getting that. A cat, not so much. And I think he's definitely overreaching with an iPhone 11. You see, my nephew's list changes year to year with the things that he hopes for. He never knows whether he will or he won't get those things, and whether it's an Xbox or an iPhone. There'll be a new one next year, and a new one will come along that has infinitely more value, and the whole thing changes all over again. But what's different here is that our hope is in a person who is solid, who is fully reliable, who has infinite value, a person who does not change. And this is the reason why this time of year is so dear to our hearts, because we celebrate when Jesus came to earth as the Son of God. He came here because God loved us so much that he wanted to save us. And he moved towards us in this act of great love, even when we chased after finding our hope in everything else. So God gave his one and only Son that we would find an eternal hope, a hope that does not change. You see, our hope is a who, it's not a what. So we've just seen the first reason for the hope that we have is that Jesus is the Son. Jesus is the Son who saves his people from their sin. Now, our second reason for that hope is that Jesus is the King. So let's go back to our passage and we find the second reason we can see for that hope. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. So if the government will be upon his shoulder, this tells us something, right? I mean, who governs a country? So for me, I've been in Dubai a pretty long time. Most people think I'm American at this stage, but there's still a part of me that clings to my British roots. And one of those times is when I watched The Crown with my mum. You see, my mum and I are absolutely fascinated with our royal family. And whenever we're watching, we talk about how, gosh, Queenie, as we affectionately call her, because we love and respect our amazing queen. I say Queenie really has a lot on her shoulders. I mean, between her children and running a country and parliament and all this stuff. So thank God that Queenie only has to look after Great Britain. What Isaiah shows us here is that the government will be on his shoulder. So not just the wee tiny country of Great Britain, but the whole government of everything forever. In other words, Jesus as the Son who is given will be king. Verse 7 also helps us to understand this a little bit more. And it says, of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it, with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Now this tells us a couple things. The Son who is given is ultimately the king who will be on the throne of David and over his kingdom. What does that mean? Well, we don't have a whole bunch of time, but what this essentially means is that the Son who will be given will be the king that God promised to David back in 2 Samuel. And we see this as God says to David in 2 Samuel 7. He says, when your days are fulfilled, you lie down with your fathers. I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So Jesus is that king. Remember King David? Jesus is that king that will be on the throne forever. Secondly, as king, there will be no end to his government and his peace, and he will establish and uphold his kingdom forever perfectly. I don't know about you, but isn't that kind of reassuring? We live in a time where this concept of government seems pretty shaky, and as we've looked at our home countries, we've seen instability, tension, unrest, and that's been really hard to watch at times. I know for a lot of us, it's been a really heavy burden to bear. It hasn't been perfectly peaceful in every country, if we're being honest. So the idea of who we put our hope in has become increasingly complicated and hard. But the good news for us who put our trust in Jesus is that our hope is in a forever king. And he's a king who brings peace and justice and who rules perfectly. And when it says the government is on his shoulder, it means the whole world is in his hands. I don't know about you, but that gives me a sense of relief. And we can trust that Jesus is in control. And we know this because in his kingdom, he established it when he came to earth. We know that he upholds it now as he sits in heaven. And we know that he will reveal it fully when he comes again for a second time. He will rule over his kingdom perfectly, forever. So this is something solid we can put our hope in. And once again, we find that our hope is a who. It's in the ultimate who. It's in Jesus, our forever King. So what does it mean for Jesus to be that King? Well, what's in the name, right? So we see, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So in some cultures, and yours might be one of them, our names mean something, right? Our parents name us based on who they want us to be or what they want us to be like. And if you watched Enola Holmes, which I know a few of you watched it more than once, she does this, I think is it anagram? Is that the right? Where she spells her name backwards and it's alone. So Enola, alone. And she seems to think this means something. Here Isaiah gives several names for that son. The son who will be given and the king who will rule forever. And this tells us about his attributes, or in other words, what he will be like. So we can know that he's the wonderful counselor. So the word counselor here is a picture of a king giving counsel to his people. We have a king that guides his people in his wisdom. We can know that he is mighty God. So Jesus is God himself. He's Emmanuel. He's God with us. We can know that he is everlasting Father, which might sound a little bit weird because we know Jesus as the Son, but what this means is that Jesus as the King is everlasting. He's eternal. He existed before the world began. He'll exist forever. And he will care for his people like a father cares for his children. And finally, we can know that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. You see, Jesus is the one who ultimately made peace between us and God. We were once enemies with God, when we wanted to do things our own way and we wanted to be the rulers of our own life. We were hostile to God. We turned away from him. We said, no, we can do it better. But God loved us so much that he didn't want to let us stay there. And through Jesus, he sent his one and only Son, and Jesus paid the perfect price, the ultimate price on the cross, so that you and I could have peace with God. And because of what he's done, we are now reconciled to God and we live in relationship with God. And this is a peace that can't be taken away from us. This isn't just a peace where you feel calm or relaxed. This is a peace that you have because you have a relationship with God because of Jesus. Colossians 1:19-20 tells us, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. So what do we do with this hope? Well, today we saw a promise of hope, a promise that gave a reason for hope. A hope that would be found in a person, in God himself, in Jesus Christ, our forever King. So for us, we live on the other side of this promise, right? We know that Jesus is the Son who was given. We know that he came to earth, that he died for sin on the cross, and he, not only that, but he rose and he now lives at the right hand of the Father. He rules at the right hand of the Father. And because of that, the government now stands on his shoulder. And because of what he has done, we can call him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. We can have an eternal hope as we look towards our King coming back. And we can live forever with him in his perfect kingdom. So this Christmas, I want to leave you with 3 options. Maybe the first of those is to choose hope. And I ask you if you've lost hope. Do you feel like you can't find that sense of hope? Do you feel like you're putting your hope in the wrong things? Do you feel like the things you put your hope in have let you down? And if that's you, I just want to encourage you that there is an eternal hope that doesn't change because our God doesn't change. What could it be for you to look like What could it look like for you to put your hope in a person, in a God, not in your circumstances? So if that's you, I want to invite you to message your leader immediately after this, or comment on this video, or just get in touch with us and just say the words, I want to choose hope. And we would love to help you figure that out. Maybe you've chosen that hope, and this is a time of celebration. We're celebrating what God has done through Jesus and what the season is all about. So maybe you want to take some time away from the holiday parties and wrapping gifts and spend some time with God doing an Advent plan on YouVersion. I know I talk about YouVersion a lot, but it's there for a reason. Maybe you want to take some time to get to know God better and to celebrate what He's done. Or maybe you want to cancel that night on the sofa watching Netflix. I mean, yes, we all love to do that. But maybe you can meet up with your small group just to sit and celebrate together. Or maybe you can go to real life church in person with three-dimensional people and celebrate with family and friends. Lastly, this is a time of year when there's so many people who need hope. This year has been so hard for so many different people in so many different kinds of ways. And there are people who are in desperate need of that hope. So if you know the hope that we have in Jesus, could you share that hope with someone who needs it? And I know we talk about sharing all the time, guys, but this is a time when the world really needs to know the hope that is found in Jesus. So what could sharing look like? It could be inviting someone to come watch the Christmas Eve service with you. I mean, what else are they doing? It's online. It's a Thursday night. Invite them along. Let them know what it's all about. Or if you're feeling brave, you could also meet up with a friend and say, hey, there's something I'd love for you to know about me because you're important to me. And you can talk about what Christmas means and who Jesus is to you. And you're not making them believe anything. It's just for them to get to know you better, and ultimately for them to know the hope of Christ. And you're not responsible for making them believe. You're just sharing who you are and Jesus as a friend. Guys, I love you. I'm so thankful that we've been able to ride the wave of what this year has been together. There's been some really special moments along the way. I'm really thankful that we get to be here together, whether it's online or physically together. And I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. So let me pray for us as we go into this season, and let's keep our eyes on the hope that we have. Dear God, we thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the hope we have that isn't in what's happening around us, a hope that can't fall to pieces, a hope that is eternal, a hope that is solid because Jesus is the Son. You sent your one and only Son to save us, and we thank you for that. And we thank you that Jesus is our King, that we can trust that He will rule forever. So God, as we go into the season, please help us to understand who you are. Let us grow in love and understanding, and let us share the hope that we have in you with those around us. And it's in your beautiful and powerful name that I pray. Amen. All right, well, before we go, there's a few people who want to say a little something to you. So let's see what they have to say.